where history's shadows cast long, unsettling doubts, the truth lies buried. From cryptic wartime codes to assassinations that scarred generations, unearth the secrets the world tried to forget. Host Tim Gardner guides you through a labyrinth of unanswered questions where every clue pulses with danger and intrigue, and perhaps an opinion or two. It's not all facts because history never is. Welcome to the Ciphered Past.
Welcome everybody to a new episode of Ciphered Past. I am your host Tim Gardner. This is episode 8, and we are pleased to welcome Paul Bleau. Paul Bleau holds an MBA from McGill University. He ran a marketing communications agency for about 25 years and also supervised Canada's first denormalization campaign of the tobacco industry. Since 2006, he's been a professor at St. Lawrence College. On his site, Kennedys and King, he has published numerous articles on assassination research for both JFK and King. Bleau is co-author of the book with James DiEugenio, Mark Adamczyk, Andrew Eiler, and Matt Crumpton, JFK Chokeholds. The subtitle that he contributes to is the inexplicably proved there was a conspiracy. The book's thesis, there exists multiple chokehold pieces of evidence, structural, legal, forensic, that make the lone nut theory for the assassination of John F. Kennedy untenable. Among the arguments, Oswald's intelligence connections, multiple shooters, process control issues, legal arguments, and a hypothetical trial, chain of custody problems, structural inconsistencies. Without further ado, we are honored to welcome Mr. Paul Bleau, and I want to give a shout out to my co-host this evening as well, Mr. Eli Frame. So again, welcome both you guys to the show tonight.
Hey, can I just make one? First of all, thanks for having me on, and nice to meet you guys. Andrew Eiler, who's a co-author of Chokeholds, had nice words to say about you, so I'm happy. I'll always, help Andrew or anybody who has seeking the truth in this whole fairy tale that we've been fed by the Warren Commission. So happy to be here. Just a couple of points of precision. The site Kennedys and King is one of the best sites on assassinations in the last 25, the best one. And it's actually run by Jim DiEugenio. Okay, so he's one of the co-authors and someone you'll want on your show at one point. He's been my mentor. He's the one who published my first articles, and you can find a lot of my articles at Kennedys and King. And the other one, and I will excuse anybody, my name is very hard to pronounce when you have 3 syllables in a row, Bleau. It's often pronounced blue or blau or whatever, but it's actually pronounced Blow, Blow. So just so you know, it's a French-Canadian name, sort of like Trudeau, right? Trudeau is Deau. So that might... But look, Jim still calls me Paul Bleau sometimes after 15 years of working together. So I'm not worried about that. So nice to be on your show, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on, and a little bit Eli Frame. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Eli Frame. I'm a tax attorney by trade and a JFK researcher, by night and all my other free time. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm really excited to speak with you, Paul. I've been reading a lot of your work over the last 6 months, so the timing couldn't be better on my end. So really appreciate it.
One one thing I might say about chokeholds is we have three of the authors are attorneys. That was an important point in the content of chokeholds. And even when we translated, we had to translate it in French, and we found a French attorney to help me translate it into French. And the reason that helped is, when you define a chokehold, you're convinced it's a chokehold. It's fun to have three attorneys saying based on what, what's your logic and all that. And that's what gave chokeholds the flavor that we felt we could have brought to a jury and said, hey, look, here's how you do it. So these sources are over 800 sources in chokeholds, and they are solid, and they tend to be primary documents, not other books. It could be other books, but if those other books are quoted, it's because they have solid sources. So that's why you bringing up Eli being a tax attorney just rang a bell for me.
No, that's one thing I really appreciated about chokeholds was its presentation manner, right? So you have the sort of the statement of the fact at the beginning, the conclusion up front, and then you walk through the evidence and prove the conclusion. So it's very much like a legal brief or a legal memorandum. So, I enjoyed that. And I think it's really good because a lot of these authors can sort of dive right into the evidence and you get off and it's all great information, but the presentation is such that at the end you think, okay, well, wait, what are they going through here? And, this evidence here and that evidence there, but you guys laid it out very methodically and it's very easy to understand. And it was great work.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Paul, is this whole year has been there's been a lot of progress this year, and it's been very interesting with the records released back in March, and everything that has followed from that. There's two hearings and whatnot. Um, there have been there's been some criticism about the National Archives not receiving particular files and whatnot. Um, Let me. Okay, this was a question that was asked for me from somebody who is a fan of the show. They wanted to know specifically, in your opinion, if you believe that right now we are getting the full transparency that we were actually promised back when Trump signed off on this.
Well, yes and no. Okay, so I'll say I think Congresswoman Luna is actually pretty impressive in many ways. But the question you can ask yourself is she being well guided, right? Because poor Congressman Luna, who was very bright, very, very principled, I think. You come into this not knowing everything about the JFK assassination, so you have to latch on to certain people who can, shed light. And if I have one criticism, is I don't find that there have been interesting hearings. We had Oliver Stone there. We had one of our authors, Jim DiEugenio, at one of the hearings. But I don't find that there's been enough widespread input. I would have liked to see a little committee, and I wouldn't want to see everybody providing input either, But getting back to your question, certainly a big bone of contention from one of our authors, and I agree with him, is the final determination forms, right? They haven't, the people guiding, or anyway, some people don't seem to think it's relevant, but they are assassination documents, and I'd like to see them. I'll tell you why I'd like to see them. I gave 6 reasons for wanting to see them. First of all, if you're holding back on a document that should have been released in 2017, well, maybe there's a reason. So just the fact that it's withheld, right? You can look into it and say, well, okay, why is this one being held? What does it reveal? Okay. The second thing is we know how the CIA and obfuscators infiltrated an awful lot of methods of communication to the general public about the assassination, namely the sixth floor museum, right? They have a big say. They had people on the board. They had their insider and Gary Mack, and the sixth floor museum misleads. I've been in there and I've seen things that are very misleading about the assassination. That's one way of communicating. We know, I mean, did you guys see the ABC show yesterday? I couldn't watch it. Okay, I had to stop. It was just a horror show. I'm looking at your faces. I think you seem to agree with me, but that's been a constant, right? That's been a constant. I'll tell you another area where they've infiltrated, and I found the infiltration because I did the first study on how history books relate the assassination, and I found who consulted the history book writers. Okay, and it's again Mockingbird. This is some Mockingbird stuff. Okay, so the next question you want to ask yourself is if there's a really revealing file at NARA, it's fair to ask, well, why did NARA not release it when it was supposed to? Was there somebody pressuring them, right? Then there's a whole other thing. Like if you take the assassination, the travel records by the Secret Service of John Kennedy in his last year, this is something that really interested me. Okay, because it has to do with the prior plots to kill Kennedy. They destroyed those files. We know that this Angleton destroyed a hell of a lot of files. So then there's another thing that happened, and I honestly I don't know how big this is, but before the ARB even started, my understanding is that the CIA transferred files that didn't have any RIF numbers or weren't identified. So the AR, not the ARB, but NARA has boxes of files that aren't digitized, and we don't know what they are. So you're looking, and people know that because sometimes you'll see a document that refers to another document, but when you try and find that other document, it's nowhere to be found. So I don't know how big it is, but I think it's probably very important. And for Andrew Eiler is convinced that there's an awful lot of stuff. Now, is that Luna's fault, right? Like how is she to know how Nara handles stuff, and how can she get at the bottom of it? That's a whole other story. And this is it's a very shady area. It's a dark hole, and I wish I could tell you how much it is now. But in terms of getting the files that had RIF numbers, okay, and that had blackouts, or what's called, I'm looking for it, the redactions. Yeah, thank you. So those that did have the redactions, my understanding is those files, a lot of them, most of them are out, and I read a lot of them, and I found some stuff. I found some stuff really interesting in them, and we can discuss it later. I'll talk to you about a little later. Remind me to talk to you about black letters. That's a very important file. We'll discuss that a little later, unless you want to discuss it. But
Yeah, I like I'd like to definitely hear more about that for sure. So your research style blends witness analysis, statistical patterns, and investigative reconstruction. What moment or piece of evidence first made you realize that the lone gunman narrative was structurally impossible?
okay, okay. So this is the beginning. So let me. You asked for the proof. My proof is one of our chapters. I think it's our before last chapter or third last chapter. It's called Proof of a Front Shot. Let me go over a few things that I'll show you. First of all, this is the witness breakdown, okay, at Daily Plaza. So 52 witnesses said the knoll, 28 witnesses the depository. Then there was another 5 who said knoll and depository, and then 4 said elsewhere. So if you add up anybody who said something other than just the depository, right, you're up to 51 versus 48. Now, those who said depository weren't lying. They may have heard stuff from the depository depending on where you were. But if you were near the knoll, okay, there were people there that definitive, very solid witnesses. So that's, when you talk about, and this Stuart Gallinor, you can get a link to his website. He and another person did this. You can actually hyperlink to every single witness here and see what they said specifically, their testimony to the Warren Commission, to the HSCA, and what they were said to the press, for instance. So that's your first element, says, hey, there's a front shot, at least one shot that didn't come from the depository, right? Now let's keep going. I'm going to show you some other things. Okay, this is interesting. So when you took government employees, right, 22 said the depository, 44 said, no, sorry, non government employees. 22 said the depository, 44 said the no. Then when you go to 73 governmental, who would that be? Maybe the police, maybe, people who work for the Secret Service. You see 26 say depository, 8 say no. So the objective witness, if I want to put it, the one that's a bit less coarse maybe, is more likely to say the no. Let's keep going. Okay, so you see here, if I Google, click on Victoria Adams, she's one who said the no. Okay, or or Charles Brem. So I could click on that and go and get their testimony. Okay, so that's how well done this section is. Now let's keep going. Incredible witnesses. O'Donnell, who was an assistant, right, to the President Kennedy, and he and one of his partners, I forget, Powers. Okay, they told Tip O'Neill, oh, no, the shot came from the front, but we were told not to say anything. So we just towed the line, which was terrible for them to do, but they did that. Okay, Clark. So this is three surgeons worked on Kennedy, including Malcolm Perry, Clark, and I forget, Caruso, I think. Yeah, Carrico. These three who worked on it said the throat wound was an entry shot, a very small one that came, and they did a tracheotomy on that. So the other people who looked at that injury afterwards didn't get the same view as the first three who operated on the throat, and they said it was an entry wound. Now, I don't want to get into the Harper fragment, but why not? So this is a fragment that comes from the back of the head, right, and ends up on, at Daly Plaza, picked up by a young guy called Harper. There's this thing. Okay, so the whole thing here with the windshield. Now, it's hard to see, but the windshield, of course, they take the crime scene, right after the assassination, which is the limousine, and they send it to Detroit to the Ford Motors Company to destroy the evidence. But the guy who worked on getting the screen out, a guy here, you'll see his name is Douglas Weldon. He was questioned in August 1993, and he says, oh, no, there was a bullet hole there. You could put your finger through it, clearly. And his wife was pushing him to say, stop talking. But you can see this on YouTube. It's an amazing thing. Now, let's keep going. So here you see Kennedy's car, right? And in back of the car, you have Hargis, and I forget the name of the other officer who's riding to the left of the car if you're in the passenger seat. Okay, so you know that the Texas School Book Depository is behind at this point, right? But let's keep going. Do you see this now? Look at this picture. Where did the guts go? All right, the guts and the debris and the blood and the cerebellum. Well, it hit Hargis, the motorcyclist, behind. Okay, and hard enough that he thought he was hit by a gunshot. Some of it touched the left arm of Officer Martin. The reason only the left arm is that Hargis was shielding him. And then some of it made it on the debris. Also, we know that some of it went on the back trunk of the limousine because Jackie Kennedy got out of her seat, as you can see on the Zapruder film, to go and pick it up. Now, where do the shots, if you do an average, in terms of the angles, and you look at where the shots come from, it kind of lines up with the grassy knoll, right? But it's definitely a front shot. Now, should I talk about the Zapruder film and the head movement backwards? Front shot, right? Let's keep going, right? Then you have the incredible witnesses. This is the witness. This is what Sam Holland said. He's the number one witness in this whole thing, along with Lee Bowers, Powell, and O'Connor. They were the most credible witnesses that the HSCA listened to. And they said, hey, you know what? We saw smoke. We heard sounds from the grassy knoll, from behind the picket fence. We ran up, I'm talking about Holland, to the picket fence. And he says, he made a little drawing of what he saw, right? Now, he says, this is where we see people, okay? And we saw footprints, not people, but footprints and cigarette butts. Okay, that's right behind the picket fence. Let's keep going. So here we see Holland, right? And he's pointing at where he saw someone, a form join, like he saw something protruding from the picket fence just where he's touching. Now, take a look at this, okay? So Holland, this is exactly where he's pointing, right here, okay? And you see that protrusion there right at the bottom on page 333? Well, that's from the Mormon photo. So that protrusion doesn't exist before or after the motorcade. So that's probably maybe the shooter. Okay, it could be the shooter or a pointer or a spotter, right? Here, you have a better shot. Okay, so this is Josiah Thompson, by the way, who did this splatter analysis. He asked Sam Holland to go where he saw the protrusion, and that's Sam Holland's head, you can see there, okay, on the left. On the right, it's the Mary Mormon photo. So you see the protrusion there. This isn't the, badge man photo or anything like that. So nobody's ever explained that protrusion from the Mary Mormon's photo, but it coincides with what Sam Holland said. Okay, so let's keep going. And this came out because of the ARB. I could get into, look, trajectory analysis. So yeah, I may as well mention it. So one person who looked at a guy called Chesser, he looked at the head wounds, and what he saw is very small particles, a trail of particles that were small in the front and larger in the back. That trail suggests, because smaller particles don't move as far as the larger ones, it suggests a front shot, okay, that came in through the right temple. Now, you see this here. I mean, there are better reproductions of that, but this is where you would see smaller particles, and building up to larger particles in the back. And finally, right, this is the explanation of Malcolm Kilduff. He said it's just a matter of a shot going through the head, but it gets worse. Look at these doctors. What are they describing? An exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head. Let's keep going. Now, it ends up, you see these drawings? These are drawings from witnesses who are either at Parkland or at Bethesda. And there are 40 people, approximately 40 people at both places that describe a nag-sized shape in the back of the head of Kennedy when they saw him. What is that? That's an exit wound, right? It's the bullet going in through the temple and making a nag-sized wound. Now, let's keep going. This is another one. You see the egg-sized shape here. You see another one right there. They're remarkably consistent, okay? Others describe cerebellum, right? That was thrown out from the back. So if you're missing cerebellum, the way they saw it, it's a sign that it left the head as debris, right? Now we keep going. Okay, you have even this is the guy who worked at the funeral home. He's describing the injury. Let's keep going. Now, this is the picture that many people say, hey, look at Kennedy's back of the head, right? Look at it. It's intact. Okay, so what's happening there? There are 3 hands. You can see one clearly, okay, with gloves. Now, do you know who is wearing that glove there? Okay, Boswell. Boswell, who did the autopsy. And he says, no, I'm holding the flap up. Okay, I'm hiding the injury. And then they ask him, well, what's behind the flap? And this is the ARB. Okay, the ARB is questioning the people who conducted the autopsy. Hume says, oh, it was pretty much intact, and he describes something very different. But Boswell describes the injury everybody else said. So, look, if you ask me, I don't know what more, you need to prove a front shot. I mean, I just name you 8 or 9 things, right? Whether it's the small throat wound, whether it's the hole in the back of the head, whether it's a Zapruder film, whether it's a splatter analysis. So you look at that. Wow. Now that's just one area of proof, and that's a chokehold for us, proof of a front shot. We have a chapter on that. We have another chapter on who was Jack Ruby, right? If you understand who Jack Ruby is, you understand there was a mission. He was on a mission to eliminate the number one witness. We have another chapter on Oswald's intelligence connections. We have another chapter on the single bullet. A very heady chapter is the one on what did the insiders say? You know what I mean by insider? I'm talking about the people who had hands-on experience during one of the 6 or 7, there's 6 investigations. What did the people who worked for the Warren Commission actually say? Now that one's a bit more divided, but then you go to the Rockefeller Commission, you go to Garrison, you go to the Church Committee, you go to the HSCA, then you go to the ARB. What did those people say? I mean, when you have someone like Richard Schweiker that says everywhere you look with Oswald, you see the fingerprints of intelligence, right? That's mind-boggling. So our first chapter is what did the insiders say and what did the documents say? And what you find is that people like you and me were overwhelmingly on the side of what the insiders say, like Tannenbaum, Gaetan Fonzi. They're not denying us. The people who are out on a limb are the ones who are saying it was a lone nut. I mean, but you get ABC that parrots these crazies who are so out on the limb, and the people like you and me say, well, wait a minute, look who we have on our side. Look, we have Boggs on our side. We have Cooper on our side. We have Tannenbaum on our side. We have Schweiker on our side. We have even Dan Hardway, Lopez, even Blakey, right? You listen to these people and you put their quotes, and we put their quotes, like, things they are on the record as having said. I mean, even I'm reading a book right now, not far. It's oh God, Chief Curry's Jesse Curry. I'm reading his book. Now he thinks that Oswald did shoot, okay, but he says by the splatter and by the guts that flew backwards, you kind of have to think someone else was involved. Okay, so I mean these are the insiders. It's not. This isn't some sort of pseudo specialist that is coming in from left field and he's there to parrot. I mean, they still parrot the Warren Commission. I mean, the Warren Commission is so outdated. It's obsolete. It should be buried with the dinosaurs. But that's their big source. Okay, they defossilize that thing and they try and, I don't know, revive it. And it's the worst, most biased investigation ever. And then you take the HSCA that lasted 2.5 years and was based on a hell of a lot more than the Warren Commission, and comes says, well, there's a probable conspiracy. But the historians say, oh no, we're sticking with the Warren Commission. That doesn't make any sense. Since when? Like, that would be like saying, hey, one of us, is found guilty of a crime. We go to appeal and we get it overturned. But historians don't talk about the overturn. They only talk about the first one. That's what's being done by historians. And that's what ABC did yesterday. I mean, it's insane. So that's got worked out. But you asked me, my number one argument is the proof of a front shot.
No, I appreciate that. That makes sense. I mean, that was kind of takes the question that I was going to ask in terms of, which of the 10 was your number one, and it sounds like it's the front shot, and for good reason. So you've interviewed a lot of witnesses, their families.
I read that. I haven't. I've read it. I interviewed because many had died, right? Many have died. I have interviewed investigators. I've interviewed one person who whose mother was still alive and was there when Marguerite was a caretaker in her home. Uh, I've met, a few people during conferences, but unlike people, my research started after the movie JFK, and it built up much longer than that. So I didn't have access to witnesses back then, but I've looked into witnesses. What I look into, Eli, is my research these days is very focused on primary documents. I read a lot of books, but I go through the files and I try and see what patterns come out of the files. And of course, I read witnesses' reports from the past, but I didn't have the opportunity to, interview people who are at Daily Plaza or doctors. Or one guy who I'm very proud of, who I've spoken with, is an investigator for Garrison who's still alive. Maybe you've heard the name, Stephen Jaffe. Stephen Jaffe and I talked, and he had some incredible things that he told me. About what he found out when he went into France to get his Zapruder film. Yeah, maybe I can. But what happened is Life magazine sent, it was subpoenaed, they tried to fight it, but they were finally forced to again send them a copy. But they sent such a grainy copy that it would have been hard to work with, right? So Stephen Jaffe, they found out the French had a good copy, Garrison. So he went to France. He went to France. And just the way they asked for the film, the people he met, I think he even saw de Gaulle, but I don't think he exchanged with him, but he saw the head of French intelligence. And the French, the reason the French, by the way, people don't want to know why did the French have knowledge and inside information? It's because of the attempts to kill de Gaulle and attempts that de Gaulle himself thought emanated from the CIA and specifically from New Orleans. Okay, so there's a guy called Gatlin who provided money to Clay Shaw's organization or contacts of Clay Shaw's organization, with the one he chaired on, called Permindex. And Permindex was what? It was an organization set up to disrupt, left-wing groups in Europe, right? So this Gatlin guy who committed suicide after the mission but he brought over $100,000 of cash. Yeah. So I'm just saying that they knew that there was stuff going on from the American side to try and get rid of him because he was becoming anti-colony, for Algerians. So the French some wanted to rebel against him. So he didn't trust the CIA. So that's why they had some espionage going on in the U.S. So that's now, through that interest, they do have a copy. I don't know how they got a copy of the Zapruder film, but they had a very good copy, and they provided that to Garrison. Now, this was the thing that I found fascinating: is that Stephen Jaffe, while he was there, he says, while I'm here, can you tell me who's behind the assassination? And he says the French were, a bit. How could I put it? They were hesitant to say anything. I think they eventually told Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy that right wingers were behind the assassination. But one thing they told Stephen Jaffe before this guy was ever known in 1968, he says there's a guy called Harvey. There's a guy called Harvey. He says you should keep an eye on that guy. Isn't that an incredible story? Because isn't the name Harvey coming out? And I don't think he was able to do anything with it, but he just remembered the name. I just found that incredible because Harvey was exiled to Rome. He worked with the Corsican mafia to try and remove Lumumba, which is French. So you can see all the links there.
Yeah, there's a lot of meat on the bone of what you've been talking about. I kind of want to go off script now because I wow. Um, so let's talk about the Zapruder film real quick. You brought up something really fascinating. You said the footage was grainy. What's your take on the claim of the black mark during the headshot? What do you think about that? Is that a valid claim or is that not?
Okay, so I think I'll to give you my, like some people say, was it trafficked or played with to show, for instance, to show that I'm looking for the term, that the card stopped or not, and everything. And I'll tell you what Robert Groden says, and I think it makes sense. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some retouching of, like the head wound and the splatter. But I'm agnostic on that. Okay, I am agnostic. I will tell you this much, though, is I, the Munchmore film, the Nix film, and the Zapruder film, in terms of the sequence and the motion, correspond. Okay, in other words, you'd have to make all three make the car stop, right, for it to be tricked in that sense, right? So that's what Grodin is on. Now others really believe. Now there's supposed to be a big experiment done out of Hollywood on the film, and we've never had the result on that. So I can't tell you more than that.
Thank you. And then the other thing too, which I found interesting in the beginning of what your last statement was, is you talk about Holland, and when Holland was standing behind that fence, I never noticed it from the Mormon picture. That little figure that you pointed out. Um, I'm fascinated because to me, when I look at that image, it looks like a top hat, right? I mean, it kind of looks like what Ed Hoffman described. What he had saw. He saw a man in a suit with a top hat, uh, or just a hat on. Um, it directly links up to what Ed Hoffman had talked about.
Yeah. So listen, you probably know Hoffman. I saw Hoffman's testimony, and I didn't link it with Josiah Thompson's recreation there. I know what Sam Holland presented dovetails with what Lee Bowers said, because Holland was on the overpass, right? Have you guys? I assume you've been to Daily Plaza, or okay. So the overpass is one side. Now you know where Lee Bowers towers. I'm pointing here as if somebody will know what I'm doing, but his towers in sort of a, they get a triangular view of what's going on behind the picket fence. Now, in the case of D. Bowers, he says, I saw some sort of action or some sort of light, that led me to think that there was commotion behind the picket fence. And that corresponds. When I was there, I was saying, oh God, I can almost see them together, seeing the same spot. But if you throw in Hoffman, right, and you're telling me what what it corresponds with what he said. Now, wasn't he, his placement there, you guys will help me on this, he was beyond the overpass, was he not? And he and he said he saw someone grab a rifle, throw it into a car. At one point, he was mute, right? So he describes that. But did he actually get a view of the picket fence from where he was at? I got a feeling that he didn't, but that he saw kind of an aftermath of the escape or something. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, I think he saw the transfer of a weapon and then the
Yeah,
dispersal of
yeah, and that
the
would
two
be
men.
beyond the embankment as Kennedy's being brought to Parkland Hospital. Yeah, okay. But if he saw a top hat like that, right, and it's that guy who was behind the fence, and the hat corresponds, it dovetails.
And you have to think about the precision that, I mean, and methodically, how methodically planned this was. So, like the timing, um, if 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 Hoffman's statement is true, which I tend to believe it is, how they basically were able to toss the gun, make the shot, put the gun back, and then disperse, right? Um, the triangulation of fire, which is, in my opinion, how it happened. I believe that it was coordinated a certain way. So, like, even with the missed shot that hit the curb, the underpass where Teague was, I believe it was all coordinated to a certain degree. Um, and yeah, just for that to happen that quickly and to be that precise with that shot is absolutely incredible.
Well, you see, you wonder what Umbrella Man was all about, Walkie Talkie Guy was all about. What are they doing? They're going to say, hey, look, they're, like the view from the Texas School Book Depository was the worst, right? Because of the tree, right? It was the worst. They would have shot him on Houston. Then there's maybe Dal Tex too, from behind. So there's maybe on the farther side of the Texas School Book Depository on the, so I agree. I think there were at least three shooting teams, and that they knew that the shooting time was between such spot and such spot on Elm Street, and that's when the go. Is it the umbrella moving? Is it someone saying, "Okay, it's a go"? They probably knew themselves, like they probably cased out the place and said, "This is the kill zone." And when you have that shot, take it, but don't take it before, don't take it after, take it around then, and we'll have maybe three or four elite shooters. We'll have one or two cracks at them, not three. Okay, not three with a bolt action rifle. I mean, we have to reacquire the because when you have a scope there, I don't know if you fired, but I actually handled a Mannlicher Carcano this summer for the first time. I mean, I think Toys R Us could make a better rifle than that. You know, it's a piece of junk. Okay, so I mean, it feels. No wonder the Italians didn't do so great in the war. That's their rifle. I'm sorry, but it's terrible. And the thing is the scope. You'd think, oh, it's more precise. Well, the scope was apparently faulty. The groupings from the rifle, when they reshot, the groupings were a little up to the left. Now, if you reassemble a rifle, right, like he was supposed to, with a dime, okay, you could reassemble with a dime. Hard to reassemble a rifle. But the biggest problem when you reassemble a rifle like that? Well, I mean, you have to recite it. You have to recite the damn thing, okay? So how I find it's one of the goofiest stories. Like, and it takes a second and a half, and the scope doesn't help you reacquire your target quicker. It might be more precise, but you have to find it through the scope, right? So to reacquire the target with a scope is more difficult. So they said, well, it could have been, not the scope, because it did allow to shoot without the scope, but then you lose precision. So anyway, I talked to an audience yesterday here in Quebec in French, and they asked me to explain the single bullet theory, and they were hunters, and boy, did they start laughing. And then when I showed them the picture of CE 399, the magic bullet, I said this bullet broke a rib and a large wrist bone. I said, you guys are hunters. Do you ever see what happens to bullets? He said, oh, no, no, it's always squashed. There's no way it comes out that pristine. So, I mean, that's another chapter we have. But, for people like ABC to be pushing this fairy tale still, and Luna has said there were at least two shooters. She said it there. Okay. If she doesn't put that in her report, well, people are going to be playing that tape because I have it and I showed that tape yesterday. I said that this is what she said already. I don't believe the single bullet theory and this and that. So you're going to have a seventh commission who's going to say there was a seventh inquiry that said it's going to say there was a conspiracy, at least two shooters. You're done, toast, right? So, uh, and yet ABC comes up with their thing yesterday. I couldn't watch it. I couldn't watch it. It's shameful.
Yeah, I did I talked to some of my friends on X last night about it because they live East Coast time. I'm out here in Pacific, and they mentioned Dale Myers was on there, and I had made the mention that it might as well have just been an evening with Dale Myers. uh, I I don't I don't know. I the mainstream media to me seems like it just is still sticking on this whole Mockingbird aspect of it.
And part of me wonders if I think who watches ABC or who watches these network TVs, and it's not me, it's not Tim, I don't think, and people that I know from our generation. So I wonder if this is something that will naturally phase out as the folks who grew up and it's ingrained in them to go to a CBS, NBC, ABC to get their news, right? I don't know. I don't know any of the younger generation who watches the evening news or who watches any of this. Would be very skeptical.
And it's almost as if like the social media aspect is actually the news, right? I mean, whether it be people being too extreme, I get that, but I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, can you guys both think about like the Charlie Kirk assassination with all the cameras and everything that was there, and then you have all these detectives, these quote unquote amateur detectives that are like, this different angle, that different angle. But can you imagine if we had all that stuff back in 1963 during the Kennedy assassination? You would have already pulled up the three teams like Paul was just talking about. Um, Everything would have been solved a lot quicker than 62 years for sure.
You see what went wrong, okay, and this is my take, is I can get into what my impressions of the assassination were, right? So if you look at Mexico City, right, what went on in Mexico City is what? Is there's an imposter. We don't know if Oswald was there. I don't think he was, but it doesn't matter. Someone, someone usurped his identity, right? For sure, because we know that Hoover told LBJ that my agents that are listening to the tape of Oswald making a phone call, well, that's not his voice, right? And they're questioning Oswald right now. So they did have the tape. And I found, by the way, proof in that tape did survive. I found it. Okay, and it's it's uh, it's from Witten, who was a liaison for the CIA with the um, the Warren Commission, right? He's a liaison. Uh, and Witten got taken off and he was replaced by Angleton. But before he was taken off, he sent a message in December 1963, to Mexico City. And he says, I'd like you to identify the voices on the tape. Now think of that. Okay, identify the voices, because what he's saying is there are different people talking. Okay, so they're saying, you guys are down there, you know who the people are. Identify that. He didn't say identify the people, the voices. And I have that document by the CIA. I gave it to Jim DiEugenio, and we went over it. And I said, it can only mean they're hearing voices on the tape in Washington, and they're not sure who's who. So they're asking Mexico City to say, well, voice one is who, voice two is who, voice three, right? So that's proof, added proof. There's way more proof than that the voice, because what's the name, Slauson of the there are at least 5 or 6 people that have been identified who heard the tapes after the fact, and two are from the Warren Commission who discussed the tape. Okay, so they heard it obviously after the assassination, and that's one of them. Slauson, I think, is the name, or no, I'm forgetting. The two who went down to Mexico, I forget their name. It doesn't matter. But so that tape. But anyway, the point being is, what were they trying to do? Why come up with a story that Oswald spoke with Kostakov of the Russian in the Russian embassy, who's supposed to be the Tsar of assassinations in the Western Hemisphere for the Soviet Union? And why are witnesses of David Atlee Phillips, a number of them, coming up with false stories they admitted were false, that Oswald took bribes from Cuban agents? That's Alvarado. We said that Oswald took a 7,500 bribe. June Cobb, who worked for David Atlee Phillips, says that he went to a twist party and others. And anyway, so you get all these things, and it's with Cuban, with anti-Kennedy people. Then you have things that happen after that. You have Oswald typing for the first time a letter that says, "Hey, when I met Kost," and it's a letter he sends to the Russian embassy in Washington, and he's talking to a person that he had written for before, and he says, when I met Costin, he didn't say Kostakov, he said Costin in Mexico, we had a very good talk, something along those lines, and he was saying, and the evil FBI did this to me, and things of that nature, like going after American institutions. In the meantime, there's 4 letters that get on American soil from Havana. One is sent to Robert Kennedy. One is sent to, what is it? The Voice of America. Another one is, 2 others are sent to media. No, sorry, one's sent to another media, and one is sent to Oswald. The one sent to Oswald, then there's a 5th one that didn't make its way out of Cuba. There was a fire in a post office, and Cuban intelligence intercepted the letter. Okay, and each letter a few of them referred to a Pedro Charles, who was supposed to be a Cuban agent who met with Oswald. He says, so the 3 that were sent to the media, they were acting as informants. They said, hey, we know Oswald met this Cuban agent, a guy called Pedro Charles. And the one sent to Oswald is by guess who? Pedro Charles. And it says things like, hey, I told the boss there, Castro, that you were incredible, that you could blow out a candle from 50 yards shooting, and that you could, and it says, don't forget about the money. We're going to have more money for you when you come to Havana, right? So
Ask for the FBI.
these letters, Mexico City, things that happen, with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee distributing flyers in New Orleans. What's the idea here, right? It's not Oswald's ideology, right? What's going on? I don't know if you have an opinion, but there's 2 things going on there. There's something going on in Oswald's head, but there's something going on in somebody else's head. What's going on in Oswald's head is, I'm going to collect names for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and like I did in Dallas for Ruth Paine, because he did Fair Play for Cuba Committee activity in Dallas. But what he's doing is he's collecting names, and he's in Guy Bannister's building, right? Okay, so I said I'd talk about black letters, so I'll tie this in. You're going to see what happens here. It's something that's come out this year, and it's super important. So your listeners will have a feast with this, and you're going to have trouble wrapping your brain around this, but you will. Okay, so you have these 6 letters, right? 4 that made it their way in from Havana to the U.S. One that was in the left behind in Havana, the G2, Fabian Escalante, if that name rings a bell, put his hands on. He's head of the G2, and he eventually handed over the letter to the Americans. And then you have Oswald's most likely fake letter, okay, to the Russian embassy. And the letter, the key things with these letters is whether it was Oswald's letter or the letters from Havana, they were made to look like he was pro Castro and unhinged and a good shooter, right? If you look at the whole thing. And now, again, I was saying that Oswald, I think the mission he keep in mind he was described as by a CIA officer who operated out of New Orleans, a guy called Kent, who told his daughter. The daughter asked him, "Dad, what was Oswald?" And he answered, "A useful idiot." He said he was a useful idiot. Okay, so these useful idiots their uses aren't in James Bond or George Smiley like missions. It's handing out leaflets, going to Russia as beaver bait, okay, and things of that nature. They don't even know what they're being used for half the time. So he thought he was identifying communists, and he was. So what does he do when he has that first fight, that fight with Carlos Bringuier? Okay, he has a fight because he's handing out leaflets. He gets arrested. What does he do when he's in jail? He asked for the FBI. That mean that's going. You're going to your local bar. You get into a little fight because you had too much drink. Let me call the FBI. That doesn't make any damn sense. And what makes even less sense is that the FBI went and they spent between an hour and a half and 3 hours with him. Okay. And the guy he wanted to meet was Warren DeBreeze. And Warren DeBreeze didn't go. He sent another guy called Quigley. And uh, the thing with Warren DeBreeze is he was a person for the FBI tracking the Fair Play for Cuba Committee activities. So Oswald was an informant. He was an informant. Okay, clearly an informant for Guy Bannister and Warren DeBreeze and even others. Okay, because he also met with people, I think it's in the INS. And anyway, so he's an informant. So what he ends up becoming, because initially in New Orleans, he's keeping a low profile when he does that. Then in the middle of the summer, it becomes overt. Okay, he's on the radio, he's getting into fights, he's getting himself seen. Okay, that is probably when they decided he's our patsy. We have to sell this sucker later as pro Castro. Now, plan A was that. Plan A was to go, Castro was behind the murder. And that kept going. Even after the assassination, the CIA was still pushing that lemon. But someone chickened out. And that was, guess who? LBJ. LBJ at one point says, oh boy, no, I went through the missile crisis last year. I don't want this flaring up again. There could be nuclear war. I saw those 13 days. I don't want to live that. We're going the lone nut route. And then somewhere around mid-December, I think it was, they call a meeting with the Mexican ambassador, a guy called Mann, who was pushing the Castro behind it conspiracy with a few and I think Angleton and a few others. Well, there was a meeting, and Hoover's people said, "You're stopping. We're not doing that. We're not going in that direction. We're going the lone nut route." So that's why people like me and you and others are finding all sorts of clues. We're finding clues not around the lone nut thing side. We're finding clues around, well, who were these Cubans he was often seen with? And why was he seen with David Ferry? And why were there shots coming from all directions? There's too much toothpaste that made it out of the tube. They can't push it back in. And that's why it's completely fallen apart. So these letters, what were they? They certainly weren't Oswald's letters. They were, even the FBI says, well, these letters from Cuba, we don't trust them. They were, three of them were on the same typewriter. They had to go away because if you did legitimize them, right? If you did legitimize them, then you're saying, well, there's a conspiracy from Castro. Same thing with his letter to Russia. But you know what the problem was? There's information in the letters that was unknown. Nobody knew about Mexico City. Nobody knew about Oswald going to Houston. So the only people who knew about that are people like David Atlee Phillips and William Harvey, okay, who are probably behind the people who came up with these phony letters. Okay, so this is what my big find this year, okay, I wrote, you'll see in the book, there's a great chapter about prior plots to kill JFK. And in those prior plots, there's a ton of people. Like when you look at Tampa, when you look at LA, when you look at other threats and things, I have about 8 or 9 people who looked like they were being set up as patsy material. And 7 out of 9 of the people I was able to profile, guess what? They were linked to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee also. You understand? So all these patsies, and what was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee? Castro's network in the USA. That's the way the House on American Activities, Un-American Activities, described the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Statistically, it didn't make any sense. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee had at its peak 7,500 members. And in 1963, it dwindled to 1,500. And that's because of the missile crisis. It became unfashionable and it was infested with informants. Now, my big find is here. So I do this chapter on prior plots. And all I can say is when you put them one beside the other, you say, well, it can't be happenstance. It's the same template, right? It's the same guiding hand. So I start reading some of the letters. Some of the stuff is pretty recent. There since 2023. These declassified, and I come across the Pepe letters. Pepe letters. Okay, when did they occur? 1962, during the missile crisis. 3 letters come in. One goes to Guatemala, 2 to the US. These 3 letters. And the letters are sent to American-friendly places, like CIA-friendly addresses. One is Radio Libertad, another one is Colonel Trio in Washington, who's a CIA asset, and the third one is Guatemala. Okay, so these 3 letters come in, and they're all signed Pepe. That's why they're called the Pepe letters. Okay, so I started looking at this file. I said, and the CIA called it a plot. There's a plot to kill Kennedy during the missile crisis. Not me. It's called a plot. Case is open. They share the information they have with the FBI and the Secret Service. Okay? They say, hey, we have these threatening letters coming in from a Pepe Menendez, and they're sent to people that don't even work at the places they're sending it to. One guy's a guy called Morales, the other guy's a guy called Rodriguez, but the Morales guy doesn't work at Radio Libertad. So what happens? Radio Libertad, which is a CIA antenna, take the letter and they give it to a contact they have at JM Wave, and that contact works it up to William Harvey, the letter, right? The William Harvey that is so nice and loved by all. So they get the letter, right? And the letter, when you read it, same dead ringer, a dead ringer to the letters from Havana a year later. You're a hero. You'll be treated as a hero. You're my friend. The chief will be really proud of you. We have to kill Kennedy and show them that there's a communist enemy 90 miles from the US. Very tacky stuff in these letters. And the people who would have been recipients, Rodriguez and Morales, it didn't happen. But when you look at them, they look like they would have been patsies. Okay, they could have been patsies because they had links to pro-Castro people, but it was never very developed. That case is closed on November 21, 1963. They decide to close the case 1 day before the assassination. So anyway, I keep reading. I said, this is weird. And I said, it's Harvey's game. But what really tipped the scales for me is when I started saying, well, who's Pepe Menendez? You read, and next thing it says is, well, Pepe Menendez actually lived in Tampa before going back to Cuba. Okay? Guess what he was part of in Tampa?
Fair Play for Cuba?
Yes, he was on Fair Play for Cuba Committee chapter in Tampa. It doesn't get any crazier than that. But what's beautiful with these phony letters, then I find the file. The file is called Black Letters. I'd have to show that one to you, but it's a crazy file. I mean, holy. So this is file. Okay, this is file 178, 10,004, 10,148. Okay, so if you go on Mary Farrell, you will find this file, right? And it's called Black Letters. And special covert operations which make use of the mails, including example 1, a forged letter mailed in Prague to a Czech leader. Example 2, mailing of black letters, primarily from third countries. However, okay, some of these letters may have been inserted into the mail system ostensibly as having originated in the Nanaid area. Okay. They give another example. This category represents probably entry into the international mail system to support a covert operation. The first item shows DoD sending letters, that's special ops, ostensibly from groups in North Vietnam to other countries. The second shows CIA fabricating and mailing 700 letters, ostensibly from Peking. The third shows CIA fabricating Democratic Republic of Vietnam greeting cards and mailing them. Okay, so let me reduce that, cancel this. So that's what the Havana letters were, black letters. And who mastered black letters? It's the regime change specialists, people like Phillips, Lansdale, Harvey. The 6 letters I described. Now, for your audience, if you go on my article called The Missile Crisis Plot at Kennedy's and King, and for yourselves, read that article. It develops a lot further, because what it shows is that the 63 letters occur in and around David Atlee Phillips's network in Mexico City. Phillips worked out of Cuba for a long time. He had a stay-behind group there, right? And William Harvey is connected to the first letters. I mean, I don't have slam dunk proof that he organized the sending of the letters, but it's his gang that intercept the letters and make a lot of, they make a lot of noise around those letters. And this is right during the missile crisis, when Harvey tried to sabotage the diplomacy between Kennedy. He sent a mission to attack Cuba right in the middle of the missile crisis, right when you were near pushing the button for nuclear war. RFK was furious. He got exiled to Rome. He hated the Kennedys. These people were both people involved in the failed Bay of Pigs that they blamed on Kennedy, right? And who's Harvey? He's the czar of assassinations in the US. He's the guy who developed ZR rifle. He's the guy who knows how to handle an assassination. Okay, so, and he describes it. That's the other thing. So that, guys, is black letters, and that's what you should see. This whole thing to make Oswald like he's in cahoots with Castro happened in 63. But a very similar strategy was done a year earlier to frame 2 other people. And that can't be happenstance. It's a guiding hand, right? It's a template. So that is supremely interesting. Then the next file I refer to in that article is the testimony of Dick Bissell. And Dick Bissell explains how you assassinate a foreign leader. He explains it. He says, in so many words, that he tasked Harvey for a plan to kill Castro. And he says that Harvey was behind the assassinations, or supposed to be behind the assassinations, of Sukarno and Lumumba. And what they did with Lumumba in the Congo was what? So what you do, and this is what Bissell explains, and sort of ZR rifle, he says, the way you kill someone, okay, is you choose a person or a very small team, and you take it out of clandestine operations. This is not your typical covert operation. It's someone high up giving a mandate to someone who works almost alone, okay, like Harvey. So it could be Lansdale to Harvey, for instance, okay? And Harvey, what he did with Lumumba is he outsources. He gets a guy called QJ Win, right? That's the cryptonym for a talent spotter. QJ Win doesn't work for the CIA. And the talent spotter is the buffer between the CIA and the shooters. So QJ Win, to kill Lumumba, goes to hire Corsican mafia. So he goes to hire the Corsican mafia, and it's most likely the Corsican mafia that made, and they speak French, like in the Congo. So they go to the Congo. Finally, there's debate on this, but it's more Lumumba's opponents that finally got him, but with the help of the CIA, likely. So the Corsican mafia didn't have to shoot. Now, so you understand. So what happens now is, and Bissell says that in the file that you can find in the article. So that's what you do. So that's why not many people may have known. People may have suspected. People may have and they may have brought in maybe a David Atlee Phillips for the propaganda side or whatever. But it's a very small compartmented team, and the CIA and everybody else is shielded because there's a cutoff, and the cutoff is QJ Win, right? Now, what happens? A really weird thing happened in June 1963. What's his name? Harvey, who's supposed to be in Rome, exiled, makes his way to Florida. And who does he meet in Florida? Johnny Rosselli, sort of a QJ Win too, if you want. He's a talent spotter for the mafia. And they found a bill by Harvey in Florida. And you know what? Think of this. It's crazy. But you know what the heading of the bill was? It was for a hotel room. QJ Win / ZR rifle. I don't know how, I can't explain that. But anyway, the other thing that was strange about Harvey in that list here is he got security clearance to meet either in Rome or in Washington one person. You know who that person was? Claire Booth Luce. Now, Claire Booth Luce is Life magazine. Life magazine is the one that got the Zapruder film. Life magazine is the one that got all the stories out about, Cuban exiles and Oswald. Life magazine is the one that inverted the pictures of the Zapruder film on their cover to show that the head was going forward and not backwards. Okay, that's who Claire Booth Luce is. That's Mockingbird always. So if you ask, you mentioned, right, that this was a big year. This is stuff that I stumbled on this year. A lot of it. So that's why I say if you ask me, the when, well, it was no later than the missile crisis. The decisors decided that he had to go. No later than that. It may have been earlier, but no later. Okay, because the first attempts are there. What's the motive? JFK is not good for national security or our economic security. That's the motive to me. What's the MO? Well, it's set our rifle with QJ Win and blaming a foe, right? And a compartmented team. Okay, so so you look at that, and then who? Well, the people who stand out the most for me are Harvey and Phillips so far. Now, who gave the green light? Who, like, it's a 3-level thing, right? You have the green light. The people who gave a green light, the people who talked to Harvey must have said, "Oh, it's coming from him, so I won't be, caught with my pants down when this goes over. He'll have my back." You have to have that confidence. Anyway, I'm getting, I'm getting in, but that's kind of where you see, chokeholds is proof of a conspiracy. But when I tell you, it's the name of my last presentation is called "On the Trail of the Plotters." That's where we should all be headed as researchers. I don't think we need to spend any more time in Daily Plaza on brain injuries and this and that. To me, it's a given. There's a conspiracy. But what was it? What was it? That's where I'm at.
Okay, you mentioned Life magazine, and I look behind Eli. He actually has the famous backyard photo, and right there, yes. So this is my big contention here with a lot of people, especially the lone nutters that are out there. I do believe that backyard photo is completely altered. Now, that being said, the backyard photo itself, do you believe that there is a direct bridge between Life magazine and that backyard photo? Because you'd made a mention of William Harvey meeting with Luce. Is it Luce? Was his name Luce again? I apologize. Yes, gotcha. Sorry about that. Do you think there is relation between Life magazine and Loose and this, in my opinion, the backyard altered photo?
Well, if you recall, Fritz, when he questioned Oswald, pulled out that photo. Okay, he says, "That you?" And then what did Oswald? Oswald knew a little bit about photography, right? He worked for Jaggers and he knew about photography. He had cameras and things like that. And he says, "No, no, that's a cropping. That's not me." Now, when you look at, there are four different photos of Oswald, right? One George Mornshield had. There were two others, and then I think I forget what the third one was. And I'm like, that didn't make it into Chokeholds, the backyard photo, because I put the odds at very high that it is a cropping. Because when you look at crop from the head up, right? So underneath the lips here, it doesn't look like Oswald. There's a double chin there, and you can almost see the crop marks here. That's the way I read it. I used to be in advertising, and we used to have to crop photos the old-fashioned way. And I don't believe that photo. And the other thing with that photo is it's just too perfect, right? He's got the rifle in one hand, he's got the gun in the other hand, and he's got the friggin' magazines in his stomach or whatever. So it just looks, that's more, here's the unhinged pro Castro Oswald. I mean, it goes along. Now, if they're going to forge letters from Havana, I think they're going to forge a picture like that for sure. Okay. And so, they're going to forge letters. So I don't think Luce has anything to do with the forgery of the photo. I think it's a forged photo that they got their hands on because it was, as I say, Fritz had it beforehand, but they were only too happy to convict him in the eyes of the public with that photo. This came out before the Warren Commission, and it was like saying, "Hey, he's guilty. Look, he's got the gun. He's got the gun that killed the Tippett. He's got the rifle." It's crazy, that photo. Who does that? Oh, and Marina didn't even know how to handle the freaking camera, okay, because it was a belly camera, an Imperial camera. And when they tried to question her, and they said she took the photo. I think at first she was denying it, but anyway, at one point she says, and they had her recreate it. And she says, I don't know how to handle the photo. I don't know how to handle the camera. What do I press? Okay. So she couldn't have taken that picture. Now, she did tell Jesse Ventura that she did, but I think she's just scared, and she didn't want to be deported, and and they sequestered her for a number of days, so she was probably intimidated as heck. So that's my view on that photo. I don't buy it, but I don't put it in the choco category, if I could put it that way.
Sticking on Luce for a second, didn't Luce report a day or two afterwards getting a call from one of her boys in the DRE saying she got a call from the DRE, I believe, and they've also referenced Mexico City and other things that weren't public at the time?
She became the go-to person for the DRE, but she was even a go-to person before that because she sponsored and paid for some of their expeditions towards Mexico City, even Project Tilt, I think it was called. I think it was her where the Cubans wanted to kidnap two Russians in Cuba, bring them back, and force them to admit that the missiles were still in Cuba. Okay, so I think that was called Project Tilt. I might be wrong on that, but she did sponsor Cuba missions and became close with them, and that's why that meeting, that relationship with Harvey is so alarming.
Was there anything that you found from the latest release or any other time in addition about that meeting, or it was simply that Harvey got permission to
I don't even know if it occurred, and likely occurred, but he did get the clearance. He did get the security clearance. And there's more Morley saying that and so did Talbot, who wrote Devil's Chessboard, said that Harvey was seen in Dallas shortly before the assassination at an airport in Dallas by one of his colleagues from Rome. And he said, "What the heck are you doing here?" Got caught off guard, and they're keeping a lot of Harvey's travel records as secret as possible. And apparently, that's another big reveal that might come out there is where was Harvey? The number of people that were in and around Dallas before and after the assassination is very hard to explain.
Yeah, like a random note as well. John Suetre was there as well. He got deported the next morning. And I don't know if he was one of the gunmen, but I mean, I think it was it's interesting that he was just there and then was deported the next day. I mean, how many, um, in your best estimation, how many intel agents and international intelligence do you think were in Dallas that day?
Well, I think that Lansdale was there. I think that what's his name? George Bush Sr. was in Fort Worth, I think, that morning. And I think he was CIA back then, right? Because he was questioned about his relationship with George de Mohrenschildt, and Hoover wanted to meet a Bush. Hoover wanted to meet a George Bush, not just a Bush, a George Bush from Florida after the assassination. The question. Um, there's an article called the Night of the Colonels or something like that, and they go through all the colonels that were in Dallas. And apparently, it's pretty impressive, but I'd have trouble putting a number on it. But look, just what's his name? Walkie Talkie Man and Dark Complex Man, who are sitting side by side on the street, right? And Larry Hancock says one of them is a guy called Hargreaves. He's a mercenary that's tied to Sturgis and Hemmings, and he talked to his girlfriend. And he says, I'm bringing grenades. I'm going to Dallas. And, something pretty big's going to happen. He told that to his girlfriend. So, that's since someone would have talked. I'm going on memory here. The tall guy who has a beret, the black guy, dark complex guy, first of all, he says, Paul, he says, in Dallas in that day and age, it would have been very uncommon to see a dark complex guy hobnobbing with a white guy like that on a sidewalk, sitting. And he's got a walkie-talkie in his friggin' back pocket, So there's a woman too. I forget her name, but she's gone through every photo there is, and she says this guy looks like so and so and things like that. So, but there's big danger with photos too. Like sometimes you read too much into them, and some say Meltier can be seen in a crowd, and some say we see George Bush, but it's not George Bush. I don't think. I don't think George Bush was at Daley Plaza at the time. The other thing too is you had to be careful. You didn't want to get seen at the scene of the crime. So how many people were in and around or hovered or kept a lookout on it, I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I have another question, and I think the theme of the show has been Captain Obvious, not you, or I think the circumstances. When I say Captain Obvious, when I look at like obviously we talked about the backyard photo with the 38, the Carcano, and then of course the paper he was holding. You made mentions earlier about the certain notes and everything that just seems to be super obvious. Now, um, the public back in 1963, they were obviously naive enough to buy into, us as researchers. What we see is absolutely silly, but they bought into this because their government had pretty much sold that to them. Um,
But can I
do
stop
you?
you just on one thing?
Yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of
absolutely.
people, a lot of people, even back then, did not believe the Warren Commission. But go on though. I like, you're right though. Like someone just wanted to believe them, and some may have had doubts, but there was skepticism there too. But I have something to tell you about this. It's really interesting, I think. But go. What's your question? I'll be happy to answer.
Well, okay. I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think that, let's say if it was the agency, right? Let's say it was Alan Dulles and company. Do you think that they looked at the American public as naive and not very intellectual, or like very, very smart? And also because they could get away with something that obvious to them, I would assume they probably laughed about it because they're just like, well, we could put this out there. But also, do you think that these obvious things were like a smoke screen that they could hide in plain sight before? I mean, to hide what was going on in the background.
Okay. A few things here. First of all, the trust in the American government. I think today you're more American than I am, but from my point of view, it's probably never been lower, right? Like whether it's Democrats or Republican. And some people trace that downfall back to the Kennedy assassination. That the Kennedy assassination was the beginning of one, followed by Martin Luther King, RFK, Watergate, Vietnam, right? Weapons of mass destruction, Iran Contra. You have Epstein today. I mean, look, it's just one series of things where the word politician or journalist means lie. Same word, lie. Okay, you don't trust them anymore, and with good reason. So the U.S. gets very polarized, right? And and it explains, I think, some of the things we're seeing politically today. But anyway, I don't want to get into that area. So I think that you have to go back there. They probably knew, like there were some distractions, right? There are things that to get they had the epileptic fit, and they had the things, and people. Not everybody had smartphones, right? So it was easier to control the evidence and everything. I read one thing that I found interesting is I think some people were saying it was the power elite saying, "Hey, look who's in charge here. We're in charge. We're doing this in broad daylight. We're in charge." The other thing, though, is well, they didn't mind the broad daylight, but what they were going to do is they were going to blame Castro, right? So they're going to say, "Well, yeah, there is a conspiracy. It's a Castro-based conspiracy." But when you go from that to the lone nut, that's probably what got the CIA off guard. Now, I don't think the full CIA knew what was happening. Like Dulles was no longer in charge, and according to, I read a very good book, by the way. I'm going to show it to your audience here, by David Mantic. Okay, it's a very the JFK was killed by consensus. Very interesting book. Okay, it's a long list of people that the links he comes in with there are incredible, like Scorzini, and I mean, I it's power packed, but I couldn't put it down. And I was lucky enough because David came on a cruise boat and stopped at Quebec City, and we had a nice lunch, and we exchanged books and we discussed his book. It was a lot of fun. But so the thing here is, if you go from a strategy that is based on, I don't mind that there's triangulation of fire, because we're going to say that the people that got away or that we arrested were also pro Castro. The Castro was behind the assassination. So it doesn't matter if the head is going back or whatever like that. It doesn't matter if there's a front shot. But if you go a few weeks later and they say, change the story, change your plan. we're going the lone nut route. I think that's what caught the CIA off guard. But again, go back to what I'm saying is I don't think the CIA institutionally was behind the assassination institutionally. But I do think there were CIA operatives that worked with the regime change gang that got involved and then got it outsourced. A very few. And they could count on a Harvey to do something like that, or Phillips. They hated the Kennedys. And they probably thought they were patriotic. They probably thought they were patriotic by doing that because they're saying, well, if we don't do this, the evil Russians are going to take over Vietnam. We'll have communists on our South Shore, and Kennedy is just going to ruin us, right? So that's my view of that. So that's it's a bit muddled what I'm saying, but I think it kind of explains, uh, what the perpetrator's mindset was at first, and then what they had to adapt to afterwards.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that the perpetrators would have completely thought that they were in the right. They would have justified their actions. They would have thought of themselves as patriots, right? If they're saving the country from
Mm.
the existential threat of communism. Um,
Hmm. Oh, communist was big.
right.
You had to get
So,
rid of them.
but one thing you've said tonight that is different than anything I've heard in the past is that the lone nut, the Castro did it to the lone nut switch, came a few weeks later, and you would pin that at LBJ. I've always heard it speculated that kind of happened when Oswald was caught alive. That they had hoped he would, get shot in the theater, or else be taken somewhere else and shot,
Yeah.
and then they would blame it on Cuba, and somehow they switched when he was
Yeah.
caught alive. Of course, for 48 hours.
You may be right on that. You put it this way: I don't think LBJ is behind the assassination, but did he have foreknowledge? Like, did someone say, "Hey, something big's going to happen. You better have our back," though? Okay, and LBJ was in the political fight of his life. There, he was about to get expelled, arrested, you name it. There with the scandals erupting around him, and the Kennedys hated him. So I think it was decide. I shouldn't have said afterwards we're going to no nut route. It's it was in the mindset of certain others saying, "I'll have your back, but I'm not starting World War III." Okay, so
Yeah,
yeah, that
because
makes sense.
I mean, right away you see that that night you
Yeah,
see
right away.
is shot from the back, right? Nobody else involved. Perry's getting calls to be quiet.
You're right. But okay, so Eli, you're right. So there's two things happening, right? There's the autopsy, right? Goes lone nut that evening. They take the body because they don't want an autopsy that would say shots from the front in Dallas. So they're going lone nut from the get go. But also from the get go, Hal Hendricks, the DRE, and others are sending, and what's his name, Ed Butler, are sending information saying Castro's behind it. So that's why I'm saying there was a show of force between CIA people going along the first plan, and then something happening that's more FBI linked, or that it is going the lone nut route, and that clashes, and it comes to a head around the 7th of January when uh, Big screwed Small, and Hoover says we're going the lone nut route, no matter what. So they had to say stop it, and people like Angleton and others, they probably were saying, "Oh God, well, what the hell? What are we into now?" And we have no choice because if we don't go the lone nut route, we'll be eliminated or whatever. So that's the very weird politics and clash that went on during the assassination. And you're right that it had to be from the get go. So, in other words, you're right to say that it wasn't decided after the assassination. It was probably decided a bit beforehand. So that's why I say there's likely foreknowledge. There's foreknowledge that something's happening, and when it happens, it's blown up.
Wow, that's really really interesting. And let me. I have another question here about that the whole assassination dealing. So like you look at JD Tippett, right? The aftermath of the assassination. There there have been many researchers that have talked about that he had a mannerism of panicking, right? He was panicking. I mean, there have been recollections of him using the record store phone to make a phone call. It seems like he was a little scatterbrained after the assassination. Now, in my opinion, I think that he was either going to drive Oswald out of town and then kill him, or he was going to kill him on the spot. When they found out that he was not able to locate Oswald, that's where I believe, and this is just my opinion, I believe that two men had came and killed him, um, and I don't believe Oswald had the time to even make it out there at all. I believe that Oswald went straight to the theater, and I do believe Aquila Clemens' testimony that she had saw a heavyset man and a taller man, and those men to me were Jack Ruby and Larry Crawford.
No, but I mean, look, some people think Ruby was in the movie theater too later, right? So look, there's, you know, but here's what I will say. Okay, so the car that honked in front of the rooming house, right? There's a cop car that honked in front of the rooming house, and the landlady saw, I think the number is 10, that could have corresponded to part of the number of Tippett's vehicle. Okay, so it makes sense what you're saying. I don't know that he would have killed him on the spots. Another thing that I heard was that he was going to bring him to the Redbird airport. He would have got on a plane, and that plane would have blown up over the Gulf of Mexico, right? So he would have been like making his escape to Cuba type of thing. Would be another thing. But again, it's hard to know. Best guy I know, it's fantastic. You guys know Matt Douthit? Matt, but Matt there, if you guys go to Dallas, he's made me do the escape route by Oswald 3 times. The said escape route, okay? It's a fantastic tour. I mean, he takes me from the Daily Plaza to the bus to the taxi to his place, and he shows where the taxi stops, like 3 blocks beyond the rooming house, 2 or 3 blocks. Then he has to walk back to it. Then they show what the landlady sees when Oswald leaves at around what time. She's watching the news, and he's standing at a corner as if he's waiting for a lift. And I think that lift may have brought him to straight to the Texas Theater. Okay, and I do think that maybe Tippett, what happened, they said, oh cripe, the guy, he maybe put the guy I'm bringing to Redbird's station, and there's a murder of of Kennedy. What the hell's going on here? Who am I giving a lift to? How am I getting tied into something here? So he may have panicked like that. So he may have said, Jesus, I don't want to go down as the accomplice or the getaway driver for a guy like and I'm speculating too here. I'm not a Tippett specialist. All I know is that when you do Matt's tour, you see the timing doesn't work. The timing just doesn't work. I mean, Matt talks about the witnesses that describe um, Oswald approaching Tippett's car from the opposite direction. That adds so much time to his trajectory. That he's not going in the same direction. He's coming back on his tracks. Okay, and there are people along the way who see him. So uh, that's very, we're getting into something there, and the Tippett murder is one. I've almost abandoned that by saying, like you have McBride and you have Douthit and you have others who've written about Tippett. and say let them handle that torch, and I'm going to handle other stuff. But to me, it doesn't make sense. Okay, the whole thing. Uh, Tippett, I think, was often at the Carousel Club. I do think he knew Jack Ruby. He did some right. He did some work, uh, security work for a barbecue place that some grill, and he, right beside the murder scene was his mistress. Okay, he was right beside the in the block right beside. So was he headed towards his mistress, or he had a mistress right beside where he was shot, not far, and all that stuff is just really. And then who were the cops that were seen down the alleyway? It sounds like it was Crow and what's the other guy? Crow and Croy. And who? Sorry. Yeah, yeah. And then they're jolly on the scene, and then all of a sudden Oswald's wallet appears, and that wallet was made to go away, but it was filmed. So I have an article called "Marina's Sponsor and Oswald's Six Wallets." Six wallets. It's six wallets. So, okay. I mean, this guy's poor. How does a guy who has absolutely no money, what does he have a need for six wallets? He doesn't. He has no money. But six wallets, okay, give me a break. I mean, that, by the way, was a testimony of the son or grandson of the woman who was young at the time when Marguerite was a caretaker. Because I was asking, I said, why was your grandmother's father a sponsor for Marina? Okay, so what do I mean there? Nobody knew this, but I found out by reading and reading and reading is that Marina had a sponsor. What's a sponsor? Say, hey, you're a communist coming over. We're letting you in. But if ever you lose your job, if ever we need a sponsor, they'll say they'll pay for you. They'll pay for your, instead of the government covering the tab, there's going to be a sponsor. And this guy who had hired Marguerite as a caretaker, he fired her. He had fired her. And yet he still accepted to be a sponsor for Marina and the daughter, June. Okay. So I questioned, and I had a great conversation. I still have the back and forth between that. But the guy at the end, he says, by the way, did you know that Marguerite stole my grandfather's wallet? Or my great, I think it's grandfather's wallet. I said, what? And then I found the proof, okay, in the questioning, because his name was Vernon Phillips, this guy who sponsored Marina. And you can see that they're questioning Marina about a wallet that belonged to Vernon Phillips. You can see that it's in there, but nobody picked up on that. But that was his sixth wallet.
Oh my gosh. Um, Eli, you want to take this next question? Because go ahead and take the next question. I'm gonna curate what I want to ask him next.
Sure, sure. I know we're getting up on the time here, but going back to the FPCC briefly, I think you've mentioned in interviews or maybe some of your articles, as well as what I've seen elsewhere, that the CIA had notified the FBI in the summer, right, that they were looking into targeting the FPCC abroad. Now, given what you found on the dwindling membership in the U.S., did you look any at foreign membership, or do you read anything into that? You know, if it's so, why would they actually have a real operation against them if they knew that they had already infiltrated it with so many informants?
Okay. So, yeah, it's really interesting what you brought in there. First of all, the CIA is not able to spy domestically, right? They can't spy domestically, even though they did, but they're not allowed to spy domestically. And so that's why Oswald was an informant for the FBI during the summer. Not the CIA that we know of, but the FBI, and that's where you had to send the information. Uh, what's interesting is about a day after they got permission from the FBI to recruit within their contacts people that could help them for AmSanta. That was the name of the project. To how could I put it? Um, uh, Unbalance, if I could put it that way, the FPCC in other markets. And within a day or two, Oswald applies for his passport to go to Mexico within a day or two. So it almost looks
Right.
like here's the guy we're sending you, right? We'll help you get
And that's the
someone who
tourist
helps
visa,
us, an
or
informant.
is Debris is the
Here's the
one
guy
behind
we're
him?
sending you. It's
Is it
Oswald.
Debris?
Probably, probably Debris. That's good speculation there. So Debris
Mm,
says, "Well, we'll send you this guy Oswald." This makes it difficult for the FBI to really push for conspiracy, right? Like that Oswald, it's better to be a lone nut because if there's a real investigation and it comes out that he's an informant for the FBI, boy, do they have pie on their face too, right? So that's why even the Secret Service, the FBI said, "No, God, this guy stinks. We got to keep him. We can't push this." That's why there's a lot of motive not to investigate her. To your other question, how important was the FPCC worldwide? I don't know that it was. I suspect there was some influence in Latin American countries. Apparently, there was a small chapter in Montreal up here. Uh, There's even rumors that Oswald may have leafleted in Montreal. I can't back that though. I don't. So I don't know how big it was, and I don't know how many rival organizations there were to the FPCC. But there was definitely, influence groups in Latin American countries to push communism and support Cuba. It's about as much as I can say about that. I didn't get any statistics like in the U.S. The statistics in the U.S. were dismal, but the Cuban Missile Crisis affected American membership. I don't know. I don't know that it affected membership worldwide or whatnot.
So with Oswald and the FBI, you were talking about, the pie on their face. Now, there's an alleged letter that he had written prior to his death in the assassination that I believe that Hosty that destroyed it? Am I right? Or
I think it's Hosey.
yeah.
Yeah, I think Hosey destroyed it. He was the recipient or the intended recipient, but he destroyed it.
So that letter, I mean, obviously nobody knows the contents of the letter other than Hosty himself, but
But the receptionist
mm,
testified because he left it with the
right.
receptionist.
But do you believe that it was about, to stay away from his wife, as it was an alleged, please stay away from his wife and his house?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, well, that's really weird. Like that note. There are two. It's crazy, but there are two versions of the note. One is "Stay away from my wife," something like this, and I think another one went, "Or I will blow up the station." Okay, or I will blow up this station. Uh, I don't know if Oswald was genuinely angry for the FBI. Did he have preferred links? Because I do think he was an informant for Debris. So I mean, but whereas that's in New Orleans, right? But what's going on in Dallas is with Hosty. Um, so here's the thing. Obviously, uh, if you get that type of threat, how the hell do you make it in the Texas school book depository with a window and a nice view, and you were a traitor in Russia, and you got arrested in New Orleans, And the people know by now that you were in Mexico City talking to the Tsar of Assassinations. How on earth does someone like that, who should be black on a watch list, make it in that window? Okay, to be fair, I could only give. Somehow, I think he was angry at hosting, but I don't know. I don't. It's too much of a mystery.
I mean, it would be fair to speculate, and I'm just speculating. It could have been a warning about the assassination itself. I mean, it could have been. I mean, anything's possible, but you're absolutely right about like just the lack of security provisions that they had there in Dallas. And I just think about this like the CIA had tabs on him. Hoover obviously had tabs in him in 1960, right, with that memo. And the fact that you have this wacko gunman guy that they allege is in the book depository with a rifle eh, on a parade route where they change. So if you could kind of help me out with the parade route, did they change it at the last minute? And if they didn't, but the fact is, with a bubble top Lincoln convertible, you're riding down you have open sights, and you have this wacko guy that has every opportunity in the world. I mean, it's just too obvious. Like I said earlier in the show, everything is just too obvious.
Fletcher Prouty was someone I believe in. Okay, and a lot of people call him a wacko, but I believe this guy. He was the liaison between the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA. Okay, and he often was involved in security, and he goes through all the lax security. That turn was an illegal turn, and the reason they gave for the illegal turn, it doesn't stand. They said, well, he couldn't have made it from so and so on Stemmons or Stemmons on that. No, they did have motorcades where they made that route. Okay, so obviously that route brings him to slow down the car and puts him right in the spot of triangulation in front of the Patsy's place. Who is responsible for getting Oswald the link needed to get that job? Ruth Payne, right? Ruth Payne's the one who provides the lead for that. That's weird because Ruth's got a hell of a lot of CIA connections. Who uh, who is the person, one of the persons responsible for hosting Oswald in Dallas? The mayor, Earl Cabell. Earl Cabell is the brother of General Cabell, who was fired by, one of the top three under Dulles, one of the top two under Dulles, who was fired by Kennedy. So, and then what do we find about Earl Cabell, the mayor, just recently in the last 5 years? Oh, he had CIA security clearance. Okay, so everything about that route, whether it's the open windows, the way the route was organized. I'm not sure about the bubble top because the guy who knows the most about the Secret Service is Vince Palomara, and he analyzed dozens of motorcades, presidential. The other big hint is usually the flatbed truck with photographers is right in front of the limousine or the presidential car, so to take pictures and to get all these beautiful shots of Jack. Oh no, they're shoved back six cars back, right? So yeah, there's so many examples of lax security there that almost made it into our book. And then you have the worst security in the world for Kennedy, and then you have even worse security for the guy who supposedly shot Kennedy, Oswald. Okay, because he couldn't talk. And then 2 days later, he gets eliminated in the basement of City Hall or something, and then the House Select Committee on Assassinations. What do they conclude about that? Like the Warren Commission says, oh, Ruby made it down the main ramp and everything, but witnesses who were guarding the ramp said, no, that didn't happen. So the HSCA said, well, in their conclusions, he likely received assistance to get to the basement. Think of what that means. A cop let him in, okay, in another door, and let him get to the kill point. So that's what I have to say about security. I don't know if when the motorcade route was changed. I forget. But it seems to me it was close to the date of the motorcade.
Yeah, and that's interesting because Vince knows, like you said, he knows all about it, and yeah, watching his stuff is absolutely fabulous, just like yours. I mean, the Black Ops radio spot that you did, I mean, man, that is classic radio gold. I mean, like you were absolutely phenomenal on that. So, um,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. So,
So you guys have a good show too here. You're asking all the right questions, so that's
well,
good.
we appreciate it.
And it's fun to see a younger generation coming in too. It's fun to see that. And you. My advice to you is soak it in. Just soak it in. Read the right books. Get the right guests, and you can speculate, but don't like some things. I thought early in my years, I'm glad I dropped because I said, "Oh boy, if I had put that in an article, I'd be, I lose all credibility." People would say, "Well, here's a guy who, thinks are aliens under the pyramid type of thing," like or you want to you don't just evolve all the time and accept the fact that what you thought one day might be wrong the next, but you'll just narrow in, and it's like a big pincer movement getting tighter and tighter. And but you have to accept that there's variance, and that you say, hey, you know what, thinking back on this now, there's a couple of things that we changed in Chocos, not many. There's a few things. One in my chapter that I got something wrong about Laurie Crawford. I thought he was interviewed by Dulles. He wasn't. He was interviewed by Griffin, uh, Judge Griffin, but now Judge Griffin. But other than that, we were really careful. They're not a ton of things, but every book that you write, you say, "Oh boy, okay." Thing is when you have so many chokeholds, okay, so many, even that chokehold where we wrote that, it's just a minor point in it, but it's nothing major. But people will use it and have used it, say, these guys don't know what they're talking about. They screwed up with Larry Crawford. There was zero. So that's what they do.
I mean, we could literally do a marathon with you. I mean, we could probably do like a 4 or 5 hour show with you, and that wouldn't even scratch the surface. I mean, you've been amazing. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and my dear friend down there is from Fort Myers. Is that right, or where are you at? Naples.
Yeah, I'm in Naples, Florida. Yes. So it's a little bit late, but yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. This is great. I'd say before we let you go, did I hear in another interview that you're working with David Boylan on something? Is that going to be a book or a?
Yeah, David. Well, David Boylan and Jeff Meek. So we've started something, and I'll use your emails. I'll add you to the list. But we're doing a research project on what the research community in general believes around the assassination. So we've done 5 surveys where we had over 100 respondents, people of your caliber, and David Mantic and people of that caliber, right? So we have a long list of 650 researchers' names. We email them, we do a Google Docs, and we have 150 respondents. And it's questions like the first one is all about timeline. Okay, so when do you think the decision was taken? When do you think the shooters came in? When did you? Another one is about who do you see as a person of extreme interest? At what level? And Harvey comes up really high. Phillips is really high. Beautiful charts. You can find that if you go to chokeholds.com, you'll find the survey, some of the survey results we have had. They're published there. But we've been interviewing fascinating people like Jim DiEugenio and say, well, tell us, what do you think the motive was? And we're doing like in-depth professional interviews. We're looking at the latest documentation. So it's documentary proof, it's survey proof, it's intensive interview proof, It's previous you know, I said it, like you have primary documents, but you have other studies that have been done beforehand. And it's really saying, well, if someone were to ask you, what does the research community, where do they agree and where do they disagree? And you have a lot of agreement, I'm telling you, on persons of interest. You have a lot on motive. Um, and it's really interesting results. So that's what we're working on now. Dave did something amazing, and I worked with him. I found a lot of the information, but he found, I would say, most of it. We've created an org chart of the whole CIA apparatus of 1963. Now think of that. So we're able to say, well, this suspect, well, where is he in the CIA? Where is he, and who's under him? So when you name people like Tracy Barnes and all that, well, where do they fit in the CIA of 1963? That's huge, right? Because you can find the regime change specialists in a group called SAS. Okay, so that's absolutely terrific. And he's a great data miner, Dave One. He's great at going through the files. Uh, Jeff Meeks, an all-star interviewer. He can interview. Within minutes, people will talk. He interviewed Ruth Payne. He interviewed Tannenbaum. You have to have him on your show. These two people, and maybe we can go on when our study's completed. We're waiting for the Lunac report to come out. We're almost done, but we're waiting for that to come out, and that's going to be. It'll answer the question: where does the research in general, communities in general, stand on motive, on persons of interest, on timeline, and on modus operandi? What happened? And that, I think, is interesting. I think it's the first time a research of a survey nature like that has been done with that many respondents. Like we're getting over 100 respondents per survey. So that's where Dave and I stand, and we met at the conference, and we chatted, and 2 years ago we said, well, why don't we do this study? And I'm happy we did it. We'll make a book out of that too.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen some of the surveys on Chokehold's website, so I'll be really interested to see it all comes out.
If you need any help, if you're looking for something, send me an email, and I'll cue you in.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this has been an honor, Paul. Um, you could pick up the JFK chokeholds at your local Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com, and uh, absolutely.
Amazon. Just I'm going to plug our book a bit here. It's plugged by Oliver Stone and Cyril Wecht and John Newman. So they have some nice words, and it's done well and well liked. But it, it's now in French. Amazingly, we put it in French. I'm wondering if I have a French version right here. It's called The Irrefutable in French. We couldn't translate chokeholds.
Well, Paul Bleau, we appreciate you very much. I would love to have you. Both of us would love to have you back on here after the new year, if you'd love to come back. If you'd like to come back on.
Sure. And if you're lucky, we can maybe get Jim DiEugenio to join me. If you
Oh,
want.
that'd be an honor. That'd be an honor.
No, he'd be great.
Yeah, we definitely look up to Jim. He's amazing. So we humbly and we are very grateful to have you on. Eli, do you have any last words before we close the show out?
I don't. This has been fantastic. Just thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been a pleasure. Good questions, guys. Good show. And if I don't hear from you, I'll wish you happy holidays and happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving and yes, and to our viewers, the truth is out there. We'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.